Hello and welcome to another episode of Atomic Vinyl Reviews. And today we're doing yet another episode in our dioramas and miniature cities building video series for Godzilla figures. So as you can see here, I've got a nice little display built of a little culmination of the stuff we've done in these episodes so far. Got the little plant life park here that we did in the last episode, as well as that nice rubble work that we did in the one before that, in this base here, and the little building that we did in the first episode. And I promised you guys that I would do a destroyed building episode, and this one's, well, technically, yes, it's a destroyed building episode, but this one's sort of, I feel, going to be more of a extension of the rubble episode. So you have if you have a little build like this, in this one in particular, all this sort of damaged area, so I'll just remove Godzilla here and all this stuff, and I'll show you what we put together before. So you could have a display base that has like already the damage and rubble already in it, like this, or you have something like this where it's got all that nice rubble and damage and destruction already in it, like that. Or what you could do is you could have a clean display base, and then you could have rubble and bits of building, a destroyed building that you sort of have as separate little bits of terrain that you can place everywhere to have an even more interactive and a customizable design to whatever you want to do at the particular moment, whether it's for just your regular display or a photo shoot or something. So I wasn't gonna do this episode quite like this until I was just eating some crackers. I know that's a strange way to start off a video. So I was eating some crackers and I was left with this thing. And that's when I got the inspiration to do this video. So let me explain. A lot of these sort of little boxes, they have these interesting textures down the bottom here. For example, this one has this texture with all these little holes in it and these two pillars that looks very similar to, say, the side of a building, such as, a skyscraper. And I figured I could use this to make little destroyed rubble building bits and stack them up next to each other, make them look like the sides of a building. They'd have this cool texture in it. So unlike my other buildings, which are all photos that are, printed out and put around different sort of boxy structures, whether they be cardboard boxes or wooden blocks. Today we're going to be making sort of damaged, like very damaged buildings out of just bits of plaster, actually, that I'm going to use this to mold into the nice shape. So the way I'm going to start this is because the indents, I want the windows and I want it to be like this texture. I mean, you could technically just use this, cut it up, and spray paint it or whatever. But since it's like a really thin bit of plastic and I only have one of these, it's not gonna be the best. Like, I don't know, if you really wanted to put the time in, you could buy a bunch of these, paint all the details around it at the front, so they'd be opaque and the windows could be clear, and you could do some experiments with this sort of stuff. I may try that in the future, but for what I'm going to do just today, I'm going to cast it in plaster. It's much how, in the similar way, they actually make the buildings for the actual destruction scenes in Godzilla movies. So the way I figured I'd do this, I've just got getting my stuff ready, is I need to actually put a little border around it so that the plaster doesn't overflow, because we need to cast the plaster on the back, because the back is a negative of what's on the front. The way I'm going to start this off is I'm just gonna cut some of these borders off the edge here, because we're going to use some of these as our little retaining walls. But basically, what we're going to do with this is we're going to use hot glue and basically glue it on, something like that, so that we have this little border around here. Okay, I see a problem with using hot glue. it's gonna destroy this. Okay, no, change of plan. Alright guys, so we seem to have had some technical difficulties, but we are back, and I figured out what I can do instead. So the hot glue melted this. I should have seen it coming, but I was stupid and didn't. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use some plasticine. So I've just got some here. I've kind of just heated it up so it's really nice and soft. So it'll get into all the little grooves and things, and it'll keep the plaster of Paris from seeping out. So I'm just using this stuff. It's actually like a really high quality sculpting plasticine type clay that they use for like making you know, monster models in like films and stuff. I'd recommend using something a lot cheaper if you're actually doing this yourself, but for my purposes this is what I had on hand at the time. So forget about that piece. I'm just going to cut off the bits that's that glued poorly, because it's kind of going to cause this to bend the wrong way, which is really not what we want. So get rid of that. This is sitting a little bit better. I'm actually going to just reinforce it from the back with some of this stuff too, just to keep it a bit more steady. So a good thing to do is to make sure that all these little windows aren't dented the wrong way, so that they're all roughly sticking out and not all crinkled or anything. Mine are a little bit, but that should be okay. Now what I'm going to do is just really simply make a border for this. So it doesn't have to be, you know, too high or anything, because I'm only going to make a small batch of plaster for this, because I don't need it very thick. In fact, I would prefer it to be, you know, a pretty thin little wall. And hopefully I have enough in the tub here to actually make the rest of this, because I used quite a lot of it underneath it. Actually going to steal a bit on this side. And I think that's going to be okay. I'll just bring in the camera so you guys can take a quick little look at what I've done here. So there's a little plastic. It's very wonky, so again, ideally you'd want to have this a lot straighter than I've got it, but I'm just going to leave it like it is. Now I'm going to mix up some plaster, so put all this aside. Let's read our plaster instructions. I'm just using this pottery plaster. I think it's just regular plaster of Paris of some kind. It says 2 parts water to 3 parts plaster, and with plaster the way you do it is you always put the water in first. So I'm gonna use a little measuring cup to get the right amounts in, and I'm gonna mix it up in this little plastic tray, which you have seen before in some of my other videos in this series when I was doing some plaster mixing for, not this series, but I was doing some plaster mixing for my Horizon T-Rex kit build. I filled that one up partially with plaster. So I'm just going to get those measurements done, and then I'll come back in a second. So I'm going to do that off screen. Alright, so I decided to do this a slightly different way. So I've just filled this cup up, just like about a third with water. And this is my mixing cup that I do a whole bunch of mixing in. I mix all that weird textured stuff in with like gap filler and all that stuff for all the rubble that we did earlier in this cup, and all my mixing was always in this cup. So I decided to, because we're only doing a little amount, I don't want to fill up that whole, get so much more extra plaster in here. So what I've done is I've added the water in here, and then I'm just going to kind of do it by feel, just add the right amount of plaster, and then I think we'll have like, what is it, like 30 seconds to mix it. yeah, we need to let it just soak in for a while, and then we'll have 30 seconds to mix it in. So, taking out our big bag of plaster powder. Ooh, what can I'll actually use the corner of this just to get an approximate amount in. Okay, so we've had some technical difficulties, and this is probably going to be the worst plaster mix I've ever made. Oh, and I even forgot one crucial element. I'm gonna put some paint in, so hopefully it's not too late. It's pretty much about to plasticize. But I'm checking in some black paint, just because the problem with plaster is it gets very white. But you can see there, that black paint has gone in there. And I'm gonna pour this now because it's way too late. Oh dear. Okay, so I made a horrible job of that, and we'll see how it goes. We'll see what we get when this hardens. At the moment, it's just a mess, and I don't know if this will work out. But fingers crossed that we will have something at least somewhat workable when this is done. Well, I'm gonna cut away here. I'm gonna let this set for however long it takes to set. Plaster sets really quickly, so I should know really soon whether this stuff is gonna how this is gonna end or not. So I've left this out to solidify for about an hour. I also sort of just drew a line along these edges just to make sure that it cracks away a little bit nicer when we do get it out. You can see we have little bits just crumbled around the edges here that are now solidified. So what we're going to do is we are going to pull apart the plasticine that you put around the edges. Hopefully it comes out cleanly, because I do want to reuse this stuff in future. Just again, I should have used something else, but oh well. So I'll just put that to the side. But the plaster is cracking off nicely. And yeah, so I forgot to really elaborate on the black paint, which I did mix in. The paint's there, which I do in a lot of things. Even though we're going to paint it again, the sort of black paint to make it a little bit more gray is in case we do, in case it does chip or the paint that we put on later does scratch off, it won't be white underneath, which comes out really obvious in like if we're doing photos or just looking at it in person once it'll be finished. So little like white specks and stuff that's made out of plaster are notorious. So whenever you're doing stuff, if you have the option to color something in that you're casting, I recommend doing that and not leaving it white underneath. So you can see this has just bits of that plaster in it that I'm just pulling off. Not that it's the bits that you guys really care about. And already you can see this thing is lifting up. So let's take a look. Now you'll be the first to see what it turned out like. There we go. So you see there, we have this sort of cool texture. Yeah, it looks pretty nice. So we've got these little windows here, and we've got these pillars. So my main plan for this is I'm going to break it into a couple of pieces and make a little arrangement of a building that's been destroyed, and work from there to turn that into a nice sort of building remnants and then like rubble around it. So we're gonna have to make a little base plate for this. So I've got a piece of foam board here. So for those of you who don't know what foam board is, it's just a layer of like some sort of foam type substance and 2 bits of paper on the front and the back, and it's used commonly in a lot of different model making and stuff like that by people. So we're going to use this as the base for our little tower thing for a broken, destroyed, ruined building. The base is going to be sort of, I don't want it to be a perfect square. In fact, I'm going to cut it out so that the base will actually be just rubble, and you can put it down on any flat surface and it'll be its own little bit of like terrain. Like if you play, like there's, you know, wargaming terrain that people play. I've never really tried that at all, but I've seen lots of videos on the different terrain bits they make, which is where I got some of the inspiration for some of these videos that I'm doing. And they do make like little separate bits of terrain that you can pose around and make different displays with the same stuff. So that's kind of what we're doing today. So we're just going to get a size that I'm just going to assume will roughly be big enough for this bit. So it's a fairly big piece, and I'm just going to cut it off, and we don't need this for the moment. So then we have this bit, and I kind of want it to taper down. So I want it to taper down just to being as thin as the very base plate of this. So first of all, I'm gonna cut it kind of jaggedly so that it looks more rubble-ish. So we kind of got this rough shape going on. Then we can kind of see that we can definitely still put our building stuff around it. So now what I'm going to do is kind of the scary part, and this is where we're going to break our beautifully cast building bits. So that's all it takes. So you can see that beautifully cracked chunks of building now. I'm gonna break this one as well. Perfect. So now we have all these bits. So you can see they've got the nice window texture throughout all of them. And basically the idea is we're going to arrange these so they roughly sort of form a structure together. And we're gonna have to experiment with this a little bit just to get it looking the best that we can. Once we got it kind of arranged in a way that we like, we're going to use a special mixture of sort of gap filler and rubble stuff to arrange it on this little base. So we'll save these bits till a little bit later, because right now these 2 bits will be top main structural bits like you see here. So kind of like that and that on this side. And then from the back, we're going to have this whole area is where the whole rest of the building sort of collapsed down. So we'll have like chunks in here with more windows. But that's going to, you know, go on top of a whole bunch of other stuff. So the first thing that we need to do is I'm gonna just sort of vaguely mark out where these 2 will go. So okay, so I've just sort of I've just vaguely poked a bunch of holes in it to indicate that those bits will be here. So what I'm gonna do now is this place where all this rubble is gonna pour down to, I want these very edges to taper down to just paper thin. The reason for that is when we put it on our display base later, with all the roads and stuff, it's gonna taper down really thin right down to the ground there, and just look like a thin pile of rubble. So you could even just kind of, this stuff is really soft and it's kind of got a cool texture, so I'm just gonna score the top of it, so like so. so that the paper won't peel away too much, because it'll help some of the stuff stick on it later. Not that it really matters, but... So, once we've got it to something like this, where we've got our space for our walls here, and all this is going to taper down to being a really thin sort of rubble pile at the end, I'm going to get rid of all these little foam bits. I shouldn't have actually scattered them around here, because I was thinking we could even use the little destroyed bits of rubble that we actually made when we were taking these bits out of the mold. We can actually use these bits in our rubble paste mix, which we're gonna do later in the video. But for now, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna bring in this cup again, and I'm not gonna make a rubble paste just yet. Now I'm just gonna color get some plain gap filler. For those of you watching this video who have not watched my video, I think it's titled like a tutorial about making display bases, for subheading being rubble. So I'll have a link in the description to that video, hopefully. If not, just check out my videos on my channel. You would have seen that I go through this stuff, which is like a selection of special bits of cork, bits of cracked eggshell, as well as bits of plaster and bits of fly mesh that will cut up and broken up and all smushed together. And the reason we have that is we're going to make a rubble paste out of that later. But for now, because we're going to mix it with gap filler, but for now we're just using gap filler. So again, like I just say in every video, what gap filler is the stuff that you literally have in like a filler gun, which builders use to fill up, or DIY people use to fill up gaps in like walls and stuff like that, and seam lines in houses where you like have ants coming in or something. I'm just pouring in some black paint, or actually this is some sort of gray, but it'll work just as well. So there we go. Now we've got a nice colored paste, and basically we're going to smear it on like butter. This is going to be our glue. And it's also going to be like our texture for a lot of this. So at the moment I'm not too concerned with the outer areas here where it gets thinner, because we're going to go back over that later with some special textured versions, with a special textured version of this gap filler. For now, this is really just a paste so that we can stick our plaster buildings in, and it's going to hold together. It's going to sit in this like it's going to glue everything together. So just look at it again and see how I want it. It actually fits in really nicely, like just here. So I'm even going to actually dab a bit of this in this bottom bit here between these two pieces to help cement those together. So you see there, now these bits will go together, and we can stick it in here. So this stuff, it dries pretty quickly, but it'll still take a little while to dry, so you can work with this for, you don't have to worry about it drying on you in seconds or anything. So what I'm going to do now is, with the rest of the stuff that I've got, I'm just gonna smooth it out, get it all in there, and I'll show you it from this side. So it looks like that from the inside. There's no real detail in there, but we'll fix that up a bit later, depending on how detailed we want to go with this. So that's looking good. So what I'm going to do now, since I have quite a lot of this still here, I'm not actually going to wait till that dries quite yet. I can keep doing what I'm doing, basically. And what I'm going to do is, you know, you could even lay this down like that or something right now, but I'm probably going to wait a second because I'm going to do this next step first. So clean off this because I need to get just a bit more gap filler. So that should do us for now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put more paint in, and I'm going to pour this stuff into it. So just like we did in that video about building a display base for our Godzilla figures and their the cities for those, we're going to make the same sort of rubble paste. So I do recommend you have a little mix of this stuff, which is, like I said, again, a mixture of various bits of like really smooth sort of plaster bits that could look like cracked concrete, some eggshells, and this stuff is really good, the fly mesh, because when you dry brush that later on, it looks really convincing as like a like bits of wire, like you know how inside like concrete buildings they have like the wire that sticks out when it's like smashed. When you dry brush it, it sort of looks just like that. It looks great. And also, my secret ingredient, I have some coffee powder mixed in here, some used coffee powder, which I use a lot in my other videos. So I'm just gonna pour a couple of pinches of this stuff in here. So now that I have this big mix of this stuff, I can spread it out quite thinly over this stuff and quite thickly in other areas. At the moment we don't have that much of that rubble visible, but we'll fix that in a sec. But now that I have that whole mess of that stuff in there, I can actually sprinkle on some of this stuff, just kind of around the outside. So this is just the cracked plaster that we were using before, that we have left over from before, I mean. You can add as little or as much of this stuff as you want, and like I said, it'll look a lot better when this is all dry, I guarantee you, and we paint it. And in the same way, we can get a little more of this stuff, even though it's like, you know, very unpainted and kind of really messy looking. I have like a big bag of these sort of craft matchsticks, so what you can do is just break a few, stick them in a few areas to have like little support beams. You could stick them in like at the front too as like little broken pillars or something, just to add a little more variety to that texture in there. So that should be enough. Like, you could leave this like this, but like I said, I've got these two bits, and I could make a separate little broken building bit, but I think I'm just going to add them to this one. So the way I'm going to do that is very simply just grabbing more of our gap filler, using it as glue, yeah, so now we have some more texture in there, and what I'm gonna do just to finish that off is I'm actually gonna sprinkle a little bit of coffee on this, and then shove some more of that texturing in. Just see what effect that'll give us. So I do have like a bag of used coffee grounds that are dried out, which is very handy for this stuff too. Sprinkle that over. Might sprinkle it over some of this stuff too, see if any of that will cling. And yeah, it's looking very messy right now, but don't worry. We're gonna shake that all off once it's dry. Alright, so this should be well and truly dried now. It has now been overnight. You can tell it's dry because in your mixing cup it should also be dry. Do note that this stuff is actually kind of flexible still, even though it's dried, so gap filler will sort of remain a little flexible. I should probably stop squeezing my cup because the plastic in it is actually cracking and I need this cup. So I haven't cleaned up the mess yet. I was just looking at it and I thought, you know what? Something I could do to make it look a tiny bit better, and that's this corner here. Since, you know, this bit goes down like this because they fit perfectly down here. If this was sort of broken here to match that, that would add a cooler shape to this side of the building, and it would flow better all the way around. So I'm gonna see if I can just snap that. So I'm not sure how well I can get it done, but it should. It's already starting to look a little better, as you can see. So even if it's not by much, and the reason I'm doing this just before there we go, just before I do the next step of cleaning this up is because, again, that's going to cause little bits of rubble. So there, you can see that shape there now. It's a little bit more natural, and I'm really excited to actually see what this will look like in some photos or something. If you have like Godzilla stepping in it from behind, it'll kind of be like in that original '54 movie when he walks right through the Dai building. So we're gonna prime this now. I'm gonna prime this in black. Now, you could do this with spray paint. You probably have to still touch it up with paintbrush to get in there in the little crevices and bits, because you know there's a lot going on in there. But I'm just gonna do this with just a regular tube of acrylic paint. So the basic idea with the paint job of this is it's gonna be kind of gray and sad. There's pardon, gonna be very dusty looking, but we want the windows to sorry people, sorry. We want the windows to be all darker, so to have that look like they've been like they're actually windows, like they're either, you know, hollow, broken windows, or just to give it sort of a deeper look. Because at the moment, it's just sort of a texture. So now our main building part is pretty much painted. I can get to all the rubble. The rubble is going to be pretty much the same thing, except for I'm not going to use, I'm going to thicken up use a thicker paint and maybe go into some of the areas that we can't quite reach perfectly with a wash. That way we're going to get slightly deeper coverage. So you could also put PVA glue in this mix, particularly in that wash, just to get it a little bit better sticking. See if I have any on hand. I might have to go out and have a tiny bit, so I'll put a tiny dab just in here. That's gonna help our stuff stick together. You know what good waffles do? They stick together. So I'm probably gonna cut away now and just finish off priming this. I'm increasingly adding more, you know, just more paint, but I'm keeping it fairly watered down so it goes on somewhat thin. I may or may not add a tiny bit more glue to it just to make sure all those small bits stay. But we really want pretty much every bit that you can find that's not painted or to be painted up really nicely. So you can see here I've finished painting it black, priming it, and I've also I did a couple of layers, because the thing about priming stuff like this, especially the rubble, is especially using this paint, is the paint always shrinks a little bit. So no matter how well you paint it the first time, you always have to go back in and just find all the little unpainted spots. And I've still probably got a couple of those that I can find if I look around in little bits, but I'm not going to worry too much about those at the moment. The first step that I'm going to do is I'm going to get some gray paint. Usually I mix my paints, but I just happen to have this one on hand, so I can try a little bit of this one. So just a dark gray at this point, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a sponge to basically kind of like dry brush the whole texture. And we're going to apply it to the brushes. To the sponges. I'm just going to get a brush and literally just brush that on. And I did a similar technique when I was doing the Horizon T-Rex figure that I have a series, another series on. So I don't know if you're going to see much of a difference at this stage, because this is again very, very dark paint. But we're gonna go back in and do sort of lighter colors bit by bit onto this thing. So this is a really enjoyable process because it is so simple, and it does do a really great effect. And I'm actually really enjoying the results from this sponge because, like I said, this looks a lot more like it's been airbrushed as opposed to something that's just been brushed by human hands with a normal sort of brush. Just trying to lighten up the edges of this rubble because I want that to kind of look like the sandy sort of texture that would have occurred if it was all this powdered building. Oh, it's also nice to not keep it totally uniform. That'll add even more of a sort of texture and depth to it. But I really like the way these windows are coming out with the black paint on the inside and the lighter paint all over the outside. Especially like here where I added it quite light. So they definitely look really nice. So here's a little diorama that I have of a Godzilla actually trudging through the dye building. It's missing a little bit here, but I got it pretty cheap, I guess, so it doesn't really matter. We can see it's basically the same idea, especially since this is from a black and white film. This piece would be a beautiful, actually, accompaniment to the 54 Godzilla monster arts, which I think is what I'm gonna sort of do with this one. So you could even put a little sign on the front that says Gojira or something like that, and just use this as a building and have him stepping in the back here or something like that. That would be really cool. So I think that would be a good reason to keep this unpainted, kind of like it is, and just leave it sort of roughly dry brushed, basically, like it, to give it that black and white movie feel. So guys, as you can see, I've got this new effect part integrated into a little display. I'm going to put up a picture that I did with basically using this, plus a little green screening and some photoshopping techniques. Well, I don't actually use Photoshop. I use a site called Pixlr, which is does something very similar, but so this is like a good representation of all the stuff we've been working on so far. We've got our rubble base here, some of the plants that are just slightly off screen if we look down here. So we made this in another episode. We got our first building that we made right in the middle there, and right next to it is our newly rubbled little bit, and we've got Godzilla 1964 stamping through that building. So this is just for you guys who really wanted to see this integrated into a display base and what it would look like. So this is it. Alright, so here we have the piece with just with Godzilla 54 and no other buildings. So this I think would make a great little diorama piece if you wanted just one little accessory to go with your 54 Godzilla. He's posed a little strangely leaning over just because I got this little base bit here that's just a bit too small, but you kind of get the idea, you know. So I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. So just kind of arrange it nicely. You can do a couple of combos, like it can be this way. All that sort of stuff. So I hope you guys found this video really useful. This has been one of my favorite projects to do on this channel, in this series on my channel. Actually, I think it turned out surprisingly well, and it just especially suits this figure, which is something that I'm really happy about. Because this figure didn't come with any accessories. I wish it came with one of like the vintage sort of beam effect, but hopefully I'll get that with the Kong Godzilla that we're gonna get very soon, or it might already be out by the time this video goes up. I have no idea how long it's gonna be till I actually post this video. Well, there we go. So very simple little effect made of by starting out with a bit of a cracker box packaging, and I hope those various painting techniques and sort of the rubble making techniques from the other videos really helped. And, you know, if you guys come up with something like this or have any more ideas, do let me know. I'd be really interested in seeing what those, what you come up with. And yeah, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and all that jazz, because that helps out a lot. So yeah, without further ado, thank you so much for checking out this channel. May all your vinyl be irradiated vinyl. Over and out!